We now come to the next urgent question. Sir Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, to ask the Foreign Secretary if he will make a statement on the security and human rights implications on the imposition of Article 23 in Hong Kong.
Minister. Mr. Deputy Speaker, may I thank my right honourable friend for his urgent question today. Mr. Deputy Speaker, yesterday Hong Kong's Legislative Council passed new national security legislation unanimously under Article 23 of the Basic Law. The bill rushed through the legislative process and, likely incompatible with international human rights law, will come into force on Saturday. Since 2020, we have seen Hong Kongers' rights and freedoms deliberately eroded as a result of the Beijing-imposed national security law. This law continues this pattern. Yesterday, His Majesty's government made clear that the law's overall impact will further damage the rights and freedoms enjoyed throughout Hong Kong. It will enable the authorities to continue their clampdown on freedoms, including of speech, of assembly, and of the media. It will further entrench the culture of self-censorship dominating Hong Kong's social and political landscape. It fails to provide, Mr. Deputy Speaker, certainly for international organisations, including diplomatic missions operating there. Broad definitions will negatively affect those who live, work and do business there. While Britain recognises the right of all jurisdictions to implement national security legislation, Hong Kong is also required to ensure laws align with international standards, rights and norms as set out in the UN treaties, the Sino-British Joint Declaration and its Basic Law. Hong Kong is an international city. Respect for the rule of law, its high degree of autonomy and the independence of its well-respected institutions has always been critical to its success. The British government, Mr. Deputy Speaker, has urged the Hong Kong authorities to respect the rights and freedoms, uphold its high degree of autonomy and the rule of law, and act in accordance with its international commitments and legal obligations. Let me conclude, Mr. Deputy Speaker, by welcoming the contribution our growing Hong Kong diaspora makes to life in the United Kingdom. They are safe to live here and exercise the same rights and freedoms all British residents enjoy. We will not tolerate any attempt by any foreign power to intimidate, harass or harm individuals or communities in the United Kingdom. This law has no effect in the UK and we have no active extradition treaty with Hong Kong. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the government's statement, but I don't think it goes far enough. Article 23 allows sentences of up to 14 years imprisonment if an individual fails to disclose that another person indicated intention to commit treason, which includes peaceful protest or voicing discontent. If a journalist, for example, discloses information deemed to be of national secret, then they will be jailed for 10 years. Since the passage of the National Security Law in 2020, the people of Hong Kong have endured relentless oppression in contravention of the Sino-British Agreement. Yet, the UK has done very little to hold those responsible to account. I remind my right honourable friend that the US, who were not the ones that signed the agreement, has sanctioned 42 people, including very senior individuals in Hong Kong, and the UK has sanctioned none. I have two questions as a result. As this legislation harmonises Hong Kong and China's national security systems with the devastating consequences for human rights, it also, though, changes the business legal arrangements. My question, therefore, is if the US government has last year warned US businesses that they can no longer rely on the protections that the rule of English common law affords in Hong Kong, why has the UK government not done the same to our businesses? And secondly, we now know that internal documents within the department show that the Foreign Office has paused targeted sanctions against Chinese officials in November of 2023. And I quote from one of those, FCDO has paused consideration of this work indefinitely. Now, I am one of those sanctioned as parliamentarians here, And I must say, that is a terrible decision to make and flies in the face of the evidence. So will the government now publish these documents and make a statement explaining why they no longer wish to sanction Chinese officials?
Well, I thank my right honourable friend very much for his comments, and let me deal with them as best I can. I mean, first of all, Mr. Deputy Speaker, he indicated just 2 or 3 of the defects in this appalling legislation, and he is quite right to identify those. He didn't ask me whether it was a breach of the Sino-British joint declaration. In fact, it isn't, because the Hong Kong government is legislating for itself, and of course in 2021 the British government declared China in ongoing breach of the Sino-British joint declaration. But he asks me about the rule of English common law and the warnings given by the government of the United States. I should say to him, I think the British business community is very well able and extremely experienced to reach conclusions for themselves, but if ever the British government's advice is sought, we would always give our advice. He talks about targeted sanctions, and I know that he is sanctioned. I hope that he will bear it with the necessary fortitude required. But it is outrageous that my right honourable friend should be sanctioned in this way, and others also. We do not discuss, Mr. Deputy Speaker, across the floor of the House our approach to sanctions, but he may rest assured that we are keeping all such matters under regular review.
Very loud. Yeah.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Hong Kong's new national security law is the latest degradation of rights and freedoms of Hong Kong, causing fear and unease for not only Hong Kongers, UK and other foreign nationals, as well as international businesses and organisations living, working and operating in Hong Kong, but many outside as well. Article 23's provision apply to Hong Kong residents and businesses anywhere in the world, and we have seen where this can lead, frankly, with the appalling attack on a protester in Manchester in December 2022. What steps is the UK taking to counter the threat of transnational repression, especially towards the 160,000 Hong Kongers who've come to the UK via the B&O passport route? Many today feel unsafe, they feel unprotected, denied access even to their own pensions. On their behalf, can I ask the Minister whether he accepts that the law not only undermines the legally binding Sino-British agreement, as the Foreign Secretary put it, but it represents a clear breach? And if so, will he say that to his Chinese counterparts? And he says that he doesn't talk about sanctions, but it is of concern that the US thinks sanctions are appropriate, but the UK government seems to be sitting on its hands. And in his constant absence, can I ask the Minister whether the Foreign Secretary accepts that his golden era with China was a strategic mistake which undermined British influence over Hong Kong, set us on a rodeo of inconsistency towards China, and failed to stand up for the UK's national security interests, and whether we can really expect him to deliver the strong, clear-eyed and consistent approach that is clearly needed.
Sir.
Well, I thank the Shadow Foreign Secretary for his comments. I agree entirely with what he says about Article 23. And he chides me for not saying more on the issue of sanctions. The only point I was making, which I hope he will accept has been common to both parties when in government, is that we do not discuss our application or consideration of sanctions and sanctions policy across the floor of the House, but when we feel it is necessary to act, we certainly do. He asked me about the view of the Foreign Secretary and his long career and understanding of China from his time as Prime Minister. I think that the Foreign Secretary, Mr. Deputy Speaker, if I may say so, has spoken out very clearly on the change that has taken place since the time when he was Prime Minister and today. He asked me effectively whether this is a breach of the Sino-British Joint Declaration, which, as I have said, we decided in 2021 that China was in ongoing breach of that. But on the issue of whether it is a breach of international law, the bill itself specifically says that it will be compliant with international law, and so I suspect that the proof of the pudding will be in the eating.
Julian Lewis.
I'm afraid the Shadow Foreign Secretary slightly stole my script about the golden era of Sino-British relations trumpeted by the then Prime Minister Cameron. But whilst my right honourable friend says things have changed since then, one thing has not changed. Communist China was a totalitarian state then, and it's a totalitarian state now. Isn't it about time that the Foreign Commonwealth Office learnt that lesson?
Well, my right honourable friend speaks with great experience on these matters from his time on the Intelligence and Security Committee, and I agree with him about the nature of China. The question here was whether China would respect the Sino-British Joint Declaration and recognise the uniquely brilliant features of Hong Kong as an international trading city. And it is a matter of great regret that politics has trumped economics in that respect, as perhaps in the case of China it always will.
Archie Doherty Hughes.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Let me thank the Right Honourable Member for Chingford Woodford for getting this UQ. Let's maybe try and get some answers from the government about a response to what Communist China has done. Critically in what we can do here in the UK regarding Confucius Institutes. Now, Confucius Institutes, we've even had universities in this country brag about being the first online Confucius Institute back in May 2022. That was the Open University. And up until 2023, the actual government itself was spending on Mandarin language teaching at schools with at least 27 million allocated, channelled through universities based on Confucius Institutes. I wonder if the Minister can actually confirm that that stopped, because there is some confusion about whether or not that stopped. And following the Shadow Foreign Secretary, governments in countries like the United States and others have believed that sanctions are possible. Indeed, Netherlands and Germany have discouraged their universities from engaging with the Confucius Institute, and Sweden has gone as far as I would in actually banning it. So in terms of making some answers to what's going on in Hong Kong, some practical things here within the United Kingdom, would his government actually consider ending the rights of Confucius Institutes here in the UK, and can he clarify his government's allocation of funding on Mandarin language teaching through those institutes?
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, we are very much aware of the Confucius Institutes and the way in which they operate. And on that specific point which he asked me, I can assure him that we keep these matters always under review. And if we have any changes to make to what we are doing at the moment, we will be sure to announce them in this House.
Sarah Champion.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. There is no doubt that Article 23 will have a chilling effect on freedom and human rights in Hong Kong. It's designed to further stifle all criticism of the Chinese regime and its policies, both inside and outside Hong Kong. Given the number of UK dual nationals in Hong Kong, what plans does the government have to protect UK citizens from political persecution from China, both here and in Hong Kong? And will the Minister look again at extending the BNO passport scheme to children born before 1997?
Well, I thank the Chairman of the Select Committee for her comments. As she knows, we created the British National Overseas Route in 2020, which creates a pathway to permanent citizenship for British National Overseas Passport holders. It is working extremely well, and of course we keep it always under review, but we have no current plans to change it.
Tobias Elwood.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It was supposed to be one country, two systems, but that's clearly disappeared. In the bigger picture, it's increasingly clear that China is openly pursuing a competing interpretation of the international rules-based order, where nowhere is that more evident than in Hong Kong. Independence of the judiciary has disappeared, freedoms of speech, all the sort of the press, and of course Hong Kong's own democratic structures have all been severely challenged and indeed eroded. And now this new national security legislation will see the introduction of closed-door trials, detention for up to 16 days without charge, and the lowering of the bar of when life sentences can be imposed. Now, can I ask the Deputy Foreign Minister, who I believe has former business experience with Hong Kong, what impact will these new draconian measures have on the international community doing business with Hong Kong in the future?
Well, I thank the former chairman of the Defence Select Committee very much for his question. I joined my business career, was in and out of Hong Kong very regularly. And it is quite extraordinary, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the way in which Hong Kong's brilliant preeminence in business is being undermined by this legislation and indeed by much other legislation and acts by the Chinese government. Hong Kong was built on independent institutions, a high degree of autonomy, openness to the world. All those things help increase the economic activity and the living standards and wealth of a country or a city, and it is deeply regrettable that this does not appear to be recognised by the government of China.
Leila Moran.
Deputy Speaker, this is yet another nail in the coffin of Hong Kong democracy, and I can't believe we're here yet again. My thoughts are with the families of Hong Kongers who are here, who must be looking at this, thinking what this means for them. But yet, we just heard the passing of the CPTPP bill in this place, and during that debate yesterday, we did not get that cast-iron assurance that Britain would stop China from joining the CPTPP, given that they are the next in line to join. Would, in his role as Foreign Minister, care to do that now? Should China be joining the CPTPP while they are doing things like this?
Well, the Honourable Lady is an extremely experienced parliamentarian, and she knows that I will not add from the dispatch box today to what my right honourable friend said yesterday in this place. But she did talk about the threats to citizens in Hong Kong and here. I would just add to what I said earlier, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that we suspended our extradition treaty with Hong Kong in 2020, and that was absolutely the right thing to do.
So, Christopher Cho.
Deputy Speaker, so why is the government continuing in its policy of continuous appeasement of China?
Well, I don't recognise the point that my honourable friend is making. We, of course, have relations with many regimes whose values and views we do not share. That is the nature of international diplomacy and international business. But I can assure him that British ministers are forthright in their interactions with their Chinese counterparts, as he would expect.
Chairman.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I've got some sympathy for the Minister today because I think he shares my sense of shame. I was one of the parliamentary delegations that went to Hong Kong after the deal that meant one country, two systems was, and our job as parliamentarians was to find out what local people thought of the agreement. And I can remember at all party groups assuring the people of Hong Kong that they will be safe and secure in their democracy and it would not be challenged. Now, can I say to the Minister, what he says is not very encouraging. This is not just a totalitarian communist dictatorship, it's a ruthless dictatorship. And there are sanctions that we could be taking. Some of us in the House have begged the government to do an audit of how much Chinese influence there is in this country, how many companies have taken over, how big is the influence? It's massive. Whole of the electrical distribution of this city of London and the South East is owned by a Chinese company, directly owned by a Chinese company. Surely we could take real sanctions against this country that has gone back on everything they promised over Hong Kong.
Well, I'm most grateful, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to him for his opening sympathy and support, which is always very welcome. In respect of the audit which he describes of Chinese involvement, much of this work is effectively done by brilliant British investigative journalists, and he will have read, as I have read, many of the reports which they have published. And it is one of the differences between China and Britain that we have an open and free and democratic system here, which enables us to scrutinise and pursue these matters in a way that is not possible in China.
Edward Timson.
Mr Deputy Speaker, the message that this legislation sends out is that political control trumps all else, including the economy. So bearing that in mind, what assessment has the Deputy Foreign Secretary made of this national security law, both in relation to economic stability, competitiveness and performance in the city of Hong Kong, not least in relation to the confidence of foreign investors, but also the potential impact on social cohesion?
Well, my honourable friend makes an extremely shrewd point. The impact of this legislation is, of course, devastating in terms of the areas which he identifies. And, of course, this is not legislation scrutinised in the way that we understand legislation to be scrutinised. It is not subject to consultation or scrutiny by genuinely democratically elected members, but that is merely one of the defects, Mr Deputy Speaker, which has been identified during this session this afternoon.
Alison Carmichael.
The all-party parliamentary group in Hong Kong, which I chair, heard very powerful testimony this morning from a young Hong Konger who had been a political prisoner there. It's obviously going to be the case now that we will see more people enduring the indignity of political imprisonment. The BNO passport visa can be withheld on the basis of the applicant having been in prison. Surely now that is something that has to be reviewed.
Yeah.
Well, that is not a matter, as he will appreciate, only for us. But he is right in his fundamental understanding, as he has set out, about the breach of the law that is going on here. And he may well have seen, as I have, the words of Kurt Volker, the UN human rights lead, who said today, and I quote, "On the face of it, this law looks incompatible with international humanitarian law."
Tom Randall.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Having also been at the Hong Kong APPG meeting this morning, I echo the powerful testimony that we heard from those pro-democracy activists who have suffered so much in advocating their cause. I welcome my right honourable friend's statement. In his opening, he said that the law does not apply here, and of course it doesn't, but that's not how the Chinese see it. It is, for them, an extraterritorial law. It outlaws external interference that intends to interfere in Hong Kong affairs. It bans the work of NGOs advocating for human rights and civil liberties, and might also affect those Hong Kongers in the UK who are working in the UK civil service or the UK armed forces. Could my right honourable friend assure me that there are active discussions happening across government with the Home Office, the Ministry of Defence and others to ensure that Hong Kongers living in the UK have the protections necessary against any future Chinese prosecution?
Well, my honourable friend for Gedling knows a great deal about these matters and speaks with great wisdom on it. He is right to speculate that these discussions are taking place across government. They take place through formal mechanisms most of the time. But I suspect that he is concerned about the possible misuse of Interpol, which is an issue that has been raised and which we, Mr Deputy Speaker, take extremely seriously in the requirement to protect individual rights and uphold Article 3 of Interpol's constitution. So he may rest assured that we continue to watch over these matters with all possible concern and rigour.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister, as always, for his answers? But as has been stated today, the action is in clear breach of the Sino-British Joint Declaration and human rights laws as well, which I and others in this House take a particular interest in. I've heard clearly what the Minister has said, but having a number of personal number of concerned Asian constituents in my area who have contacted me about the message this sends to those who have left the Chinese regime raises concern for the protection of those who live and work here. And if we cannot hold the Chinese to their word, then the question is anyone safe? And what message does the Minister have for my constituents?
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, he asked me at the end of his interesting contribution a philosophical question, and indeed he seeks, I think, a rhetorical answer. But by the very way in which he expressed his question, he made clear precisely what the dangers are here. And we've seen, Mr Deputy Speaker, throughout the trial of Jimmy Lai, that this is a political prosecution. And once again, we call for his immediate release. And finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, he talked about this being a breach of the Sino-British Joint Declaration, a point that has been mentioned earlier during this session. Technically, as the Hong Kong government is legislating for itself, it may or may not be a breach technically, but we have been perfectly clear since 2021 that China is in ongoing breach of the declaration.
Thank the Minister for responding to the urgent question and to the questions of others here today.